And on the audio in 3, 2, 1. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sandy K Nutrition, Health and Lifestyle Queen. Today with me, I have a special guest. Well, he's not that special anymore. I'm sorry, Nick. You've been on my show 3 times. This is the 3rd time. I love our conversations. And Dr. Nick Bitz, he is a naturopathic physician, and his specialization is in Ayurvedic medicine. He is a leading voice in the natural products industry and currently serves as Senior Vice President of Product Development at Neurohacker Collective. His areas of expertise include nootropics, anti-aging medicine, biohacking, herbology, nutrition, and dietary supplements. Our talk today is going to be all about Ayurvedic medicine and how we can maintain wellness according to its principles. Now, Dr. Nick and I, we chatted about this the last time. I'm like, you know what? I really need to learn a little bit more about Ayurveda and its practices, and who better to talk about it with than Nick? And so here he is. And with that, welcome, Nick. Thank you so much for coming back.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. I really appreciate it. I think this should be really fun. I love talking about Ayurveda.
Yeah, and I don't know how much input I'm going to have because I don't know enough about Ayurvedic medicine other than, the body parts, like body shapes. So, and I think a lot of people are familiar with that, but you have to let us know how you got involved in Ayurvedic medicine.
Yeah, where to even start? I think my journey into natural medicine as a whole began when I was about 12. I fell out of a tree throwing snowballs at cars like all little boys do. And I landed in a way that really hurt my back. I was paralyzed for probably 5 minutes. And I remember lying there staring up at the sky, and slowly sensation was coming back into my fingertips and my feet. And eventually I recovered and I was able to walk that day. But the lingering pain was unbearable. And so I was 12, I was active. I was playing sports. I skied, I played basketball. I was on my feet running around constantly, but I was in pain. And so I had to go to different physicians trying to get diagnosed, trying to get treated. But ultimately they did all the imaging, they did all the testing, and they were like, you're fine. And so I think it was, I really had an inflamed nerve or nerves throughout the body because of that fall. And so it led me into a journey to heal myself. There was nothing that traditional allopathic physicians in the US could really do for me. And so I just changed how I was eating. I had to start working with botanicals. I ventured into acupuncture. I understood my body type. I started really just working with the different tools around me to heal myself. And so that's really when I started doing a deep dive into natural medicine. I started applying these tools to myself. And ultimately, I think I healed myself. I became stronger on the other end and very healthy without any pain. And so that's where it all started. I think, it led me into the world of naturopathic medicine. I was I was moving towards traditional allopathic medical school here in the US, but along the way, I had a conversation with Dr. Andrew Weil, who
Oh,
who's the godfather of natural medicine, at least in the US. He was an early mouthpiece. But he had said to me, he said, yeah, it depends on how you want to practice. If you want to practice medicine in this specific way where you diagnose and treat using pharmaceuticals, yeah, continue along that path. But if you really want to get into botanicals and diet and really begin to understand people and take time to understand people, he's like, I would highly recommend going to naturopathic medical school. And so I didn't even know what that was, but I looked into it. And this was, sometime during high school. And then I visited Seattle, Bastyr University up in Seattle.
oh, is that where you went?
That is where I went.
Oh,
Yep.
Bastyr is known. See, even I know that here in Canada, that Bastyr is amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, in the early 1900s, there were 30, 40, 50 different naturopathic medical schools in the US. And then in 1911, there was something called the Flexner Report that came out where um, this group basically had recommended that there's one model of medical school that they wanted to recommend for the US. And this was the John Hopkins model.
Okay.
And so this became traditional allopathic medical practice in the US, that specific model. And they kind of pushed aside all the naturopathic medical schools. They got defunded and they ultimately disappeared. But in the 70s, they had this resurgence of natural medicine and Bastyr was established. And then from that, there's been a couple other schools in the US. There's a couple other schools, or maybe just one up in Canada. So they're still few and far between, but they're very focused. And they tend to be kind of the hotbed of integrative medicine. You get some of the best thinkers in terms of botanical medicine, in terms of Ayurveda, in terms of nutrition. They all gravitate towards these little epicenters.
Yeah.
And so Bastyr is one of them. It really was one of the early emergers of naturopathic medicine in the States. And I think in part because it aligned itself with science. And so Bastyr is really known for its science-heavy curriculum. But I loved it. That was my intro to Ayurveda. You know, I was practicing yoga for many years and didn't really know about Ayurveda, which is its sister science. But because I had a good understanding of yoga, I had a decent understanding and grasp of Sanskrit. And I started learning more and more. And then when I heard about Ayurvedic medicine, my first year up at Bastyr, I was absolutely enthralled. I had studied with a doctor named Dr. Robert Svoboda. He's one of the first Westerners that had graduated from an Ayurvedic medical school in India, I believe in the 70s. And then he came back and just became this amazing teacher. He's written a lot of books. He's a mentor to many. He teaches everywhere, but he for me just turned on the light switch, and I became absolutely enthralled with Ayurveda as a whole. And that became my focus really when I was at Bastyr. I was really known as the Ayurvedic student overall. There weren't a lot of us, but that was my focus. And I got into I got into pulse diagnosis, face, tongue diagnosis. I got into the botanical aspect. I moved over to India, studied over there at an
You did?
ashram. Yeah,
That is so cool, Nick.
and the nice thing is, Dr. Svoboda had recommended this one school that caters to the Western mindset. So a lot of Westerners, from Australia, from England, from the US, they come over there because they speak English. And they really kind of cater to the Western audience. And so I was one of the early phases into this program, and plugged in there, practiced in a Ayurvedic hospital, and just kind of put my roots down into the medical system. And so I brought that back to Seattle. Eventually graduated from Bastyr, and then it just from there everything's kind of moved, and it's been amazing.
So what that's so interesting is because I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, because again, I'm truly I don't know much about Ayurvedic medicine. Is this the main medical system practice in India?
Yeah, so great question. So what is Ayurveda, right?
Yeah,
I'm
what
sure
is it? Like,
that a lot of
yeah.
people are asking that right now. So in short, Ayurveda is the traditional healing system of India. It's considered the oldest form of medicine in the world. So all medicines came from Ayurvedic medicine. And so it's more than 5,000 years old. It's still alive. It's still flourishing today, especially in India. And now we're starting to see this influx into the US, probably Canada as well. But it is the sister science to yoga. They kind of go hand in hand. Yoga is all about the spirit, and Ayurveda is all about the body. Ayurveda comes from two Sanskrit words. One is Ayu, that means life, and then there's Veda, and Veda means science. And so Ayurveda then is the science of life. So it's much more than just a medical system about diagnosis and treatment. It's about how we live, how you interact with nature, how you interact with yourself, all of that just to live a better life overall. And of course, inherent in that is the medicine as well. That's inherent to the overall philosophy. But it's a philosophy, it's a worldview about how life created and where we are in the universe and how you can optimize your place in the universe, giving this kind of unique understanding.
It sounds like I don't really see a lot of science in there. Am I wrong? Like, like it seems you're talking about kind of how life, yeah, like your lifestyle. Like to me, it sounds very holistic.
Yeah. Well, and you need to understand how you define science, at least how we probably define science right now, is informed by what science is today. It's a very modern thing. It's the scientific a process that you either can prove or disprove certain
Yes.
truths. And but 5,000 years ago, it was framed very differently. Science was almost something that was experienced and then defined. And so Ayurveda was really kind of delineated by the saints and sages that meditated, that were in touch with the universe and the universal laws and their body, and they could describe these things and put them into a group of books that are called the Vedas. And so I think they had a very different way to look at science. But for them, it's just what is true. And, they tested it on themselves, and they discovered what's true. And
Yeah.
then through different applications and a lot of people practicing it, they said, okay, this is in fact a universal truth. And that
Okay.
became, kind of some of the core principles of Ayurveda.
So N of one matters. And
Yeah,
it
that's
and
where it
it's part
starts.
and
Yeah.
it's part of then the collective. When other people say, "Oh yeah, me too. I felt that same way." And then you start to develop the principles. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that defines Ayurveda. And, again, this 5,000-year-old medical system or lifestyle system as it is now being supported by science, our modern day science. And you're finding that little by little. So it is slowly becoming more modern. But what I like about it is that it still is old and it's different than how we view the world presently. And I think it's needed because I think the way modern individuals view the world is skewed in a lot of ways. And it's out of touch with nature and these
Yes.
larger universal principles. And so Ayurveda for me is it's a return back to nature. It's a return back to basics. And that's the most important thing. And if I can experience the benefits of that, for me, that's truth.
Oh my gosh. I love what you're saying just because, when it's just like somebody saying, well, this doesn't count because it's N of one. So, and I've heard that before. I'm like, well, it counts for me. And it actually makes me healthier. And, I don't know if I have to prove that I'm healthy, but I feel pretty good. And
Yeah.
you get what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's just so fascinating. So what are the main principles then of
Uh,
Ayurveda?
Yeah, great question. There are several. Let's see how many we can touch right now.
Okay. Okay.
I think the first one is this idea of body types,
Yes.
and I think people have heard this idea, and if they know about Ayurveda, they know that there are body types, and I think there's a lot of misinformation there, and so it's always hard to talk about it because I don't want to provide more misinformation, but the topic is so deep and so wonderful and amazing. And so if you can get that, then you get the real information, which is fantastic. But so people have probably heard about Vata, Pitta, and Kapha.
Yes.
And those are Sanskrit, words. They're very foreign to the Western mind. But
Can you define Sanskrit? Like, what does Sanskrit mean?
yeah, so Sanskrit is just like Latin, just like English. It's a language.
Oh, see, I
But
didn't know that.
yeah, and so again, when you get back into it, many consider Sanskrit to be one of the first languages. Um,
Interesting.
like everybody has heard the word Om, right?
Yes.
And people chant Om, and that is a Sanskrit word, and it has really profound meaning. But the saints and sages that lived thousands of years ago, they discovered that that is the sound of the universe. And so by doing that, you can align yourself with the energy of the universe. And so the word has that energy and that meaning. And so Sanskrit words are words, but they also have these these vibrational charges that have effects on the body and can ignite the mind in certain ways. And so Sanskrit is, it's the basis of yoga. It's the basis of Ayurveda, and all of the textbooks that are written about yoga and Ayurveda are usually in Sanskrit.
Oh, thank you for clarifying. Like, I had no idea because I've heard that word, but I didn't really understand the meaning of it. Perfect. Okay. So we were talking about the body types.
Yes, so Vata, Pitta, Kapha. So essentially, those are the three main body types, but people can be a mix of those three. And so in essence, there are 7 body types. It gets very complicated, but you can be a Vata and a Pitta, or you can be a Vata and a Kapha, or you can be a purely Vata, as it were. So it's easy when kind of just talking about it, just to really focus on Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And they're what we see in nature. When you look at a group of individuals, you can identify who is Vata, who is Pitta, who is Kapha. And the best way to get a diagnosis is through pulse diagnosis. That and working with somebody who really understands Ayurveda. You can figure out your body type doing questionnaires online, and they can be accurate to some degree, but they're not 100% accurate. They're loosely accurate. So if you're intrigued to find out if you are a Vata, Pitta, or Kapha, you certainly can Google a questionnaire online and see if you can delineate exactly where you fall. But Vata, just in short, and I'll just lay this out just for easy reference. Vata body types tend to be slender individuals, often taller. So they're light, they're thin, they're dry. They tend to be a little bit more nervous and restless. And so you see that in people. Then you have the Pittas. The Pittas tend to be more muscular. They tend to always exude warmth, either emotionally or they're actually just really hot at the temperature level. And they're intense. They're very fiery overall. And then there's Kaphas. Kaphas are big boned individuals. They're very heavy. They're very solid. They have very slow metabolism. They're prone to weight gain, congestion, and these things. And so once you understand your body type, that opens the door to Ayurveda, because every body type, Vata, Pitta, Kapha, is a combination of the 5 elements. And so this gets back to kind of another core principle of Ayurveda, which is the 5 great elements. And so Ayurveda, because it's a philosophy of life, it's much more than just medicine. It talks about the origins of life. And it basically says that everything comes from pure consciousness, and eventually it becomes more dense into physical matter. And through that, you get these 5 universal elements, and they're space, air, water, fire, and then earth. And so those 5 elements really move from very subtle, from the space and air, to the very dense, which is like earth. And so humans then are a combination of those 5 different elements. So Vata tends to be space and air predominantly. It lacks water, fire, and earth. So it's predominantly, again, these are the slender, skinny people. They're mostly space and air. So the Pittas are fire and water. And so they're lacking the space and air, they're lacking the earth. They tend to be those 2 elements. And then the Kapha is water and earth, very dense. And so those 5 elements make up everything in the human body. And those 5 elements also make up everything that we consume. So botanicals and food. And so if you want to create balance in the body, you basically need to consume the right botanicals and the right foods according to Ayurveda. And so your body type is set at the moment of conception, and you're always forever throughout your entire life, you're trying to maintain that original body type. So that specific
Oh.
ratio of Vata, Pitta, Kapha in your body, you're always trying to maintain that balance. So if you are, for example, if you are a Pitta, right? Pittas are known to be fiery. You don't want to add more fire in what you consume, whether it's on TV, whether it's the friends that you hang out with, whether it's your career, whether it's fiery foods, alcohol, coffee, red meat, onions, garlic, spices. These things add fire to the body. And so the only way to create balance for a fire individual is to do the opposite. So the golden rule of Ayurveda is that like increases like and opposites create balance. So once you understand your body type and you understand the elements that make up your body, you basically need to know, you then know what you need to avoid and what you need to consume. So opposites create balance. So pittas do the opposite of fire. So everything that they consume should be cooling, as it were. It should be putting out the fire element. So they should be doing meditation. They should be doing calming yoga. They should move out of the city, potentially move to the Pacific Northwest where it's cool, doing cooling botanicals every day. There's these things create balance in the body. And so for Pitta individuals, we know exactly what they need to do to stay healthy, to create balance. And that's true for all of them. Once you're a Vata, you do anti-Vata protocols. Once you know you're a Kapha, you do anti-Kapha protocols. And so like increases like, opposites create balance. And so Ayurveda, in essence, is a medicine of energetics, and it breaks everything down into its energetic components, and that describes exactly what you should consume and exactly what you should avoid.
That's so interesting. And you know what? There's a little bit of similarity between that and Chinese medicine,
Yep.
right? Do you see that too? Because I was doing acupuncture for a while there for migraines, and the Chinese medicine doctor, he studied in China. He knew so much, and he was talking about the, yin and yang. I know they say yang, like
Yeah.
probably not, I
Yeah.
won't pronounce it right. And how if you have too much yin, you want to add more yang. I know I'm going to say it wrong,
Yep. Yep.
but forgive me for that. But it's more about just trying to rejig and create that balance. And I found it fascinating that you were explaining. So you're born one of these, and right, you're born that, and you don't change. Like, so here's a good example.
Yep.
And maybe this is because a lot of my listeners are menopausal women. They are thin, and they might appear to be, let's say Pitta. Pitta is like kind of even. I might be wrong, but I see it kind of as the middle, like the middle one,
Yeah.
right?
I would agree.
You know how you have one that's much thinner, maybe one that's a little bit heavier. Pitta seems to be the middle. I think I was a Pitta my whole life. Then I had my thyroid removed, and I've had a Chinese medicine doctor say, I can't work with you because you no longer have the master gland. Seriously. I was like, whoa. Okay, well, maybe you're not that great of a Chinese medicine doctor if you can't work with me then.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I was like kind of thrown aback. But when I saw it in that way, that once that master gland was gone, it threw off my balance. Is there anything in Ayurveda that kind of speaks to that time where, you lose balance because you have a sickness or a surgery or something like that, and you're no longer what you were before.
Yeah, and there are phases of life too, where, early in life is a Kapha predominant phase, then you move into a Pitta, and eventually as we age, you move into a Vata, which that dry essence just overtakes us, later in life.
Yes.
And so again, I mean, we're always changing. The seasons are changing. Our food inputs are changing. Our life circumstances are changing, but your body type is still the same. You're just getting different elemental inputs on a daily, weekly, yearly basis. And so if you really are intimate with that knowledge, you then know what you need to increase or decrease in order to maintain your original body type that was, again, at the point of conception. And so yes, later in life, if you have some, let's say you have a surgery or you have a health setback or a death in the family, it certainly will push some of those elements out of place. But they are easy to bring them back into place. So, but again, the important thing is just to recognize that you have a body type, and you need to befriend your body type. Right. So if you are a Vata and you have trouble putting weight on, and then suddenly you start doing protein powders and creatine and lifting, and you're eating, chicken, 7 times a day in order to hit like 500 grams of protein, like you're doing yourself a disservice because you're trying to basically create a Pitta body type, which is not your body type. So you need to befriend your body type and really own it and try to create balance within your own body type. So if you're a Kapha, it's going to be hard to lose weight. So doing like laxative therapies and not eating and doing like, just be careful. You aren't a Vata, you're not a skinny mini. You are a big bone, solid human, and that is your nature. And so all of the body types have their downsides, their challenges, but they certainly have their virtues and some of their positive aspects. So just know where you are and really try to own it.
So I can pretty much say with confidence, because I think I have a book somewhere on my bookshelf on this, on the body types. I'm pretty sure I'm a Pitta.
Yep, I would
Um
agree.
and I would you say, is there one body type that is more common with the general public?
No, not
No?
body types. I would say there's some common attributes to imbalances that we're seeing right now.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And so, obviously, so Vata is air and space. Vata rules any kind of communication or movement in the body. And I'm thinking that, or I'm seeing that with social media, people are consuming these things and their mind's going crazy like this. Their nervous system is activated, and you're increasing Vata. You're increasing that body type. So, uh, it's important then, I think, given the modern world that we live in, to do things that help to lower Vata, and so to consume anti-Vata foods, to do these lifestyle things as well. So I think that's critically important. People that are driven professionally are certainly consumed by Pitta and that fire. And so you need to make sure that you're offsetting that. And so we are seeing imbalances at different ages, different demographics, but it's fairly easy to identify them overall. And it's interesting because if I know your body type, I can tell you what diseases you will have in life. And it's that you have a propensity given your body type. So if you are Pitta, you are going to be more prone to hyperacidity, skin rashes, ulcers, high blood pressure, hair loss, graying of hair. If you're a Vata, you're going to be more prone to weight loss, especially later in life, sarcopenia, which is
Mhm.
muscle wasting, joint pains, headaches, constipation, often mental illness. And then if you're a Kapha, you're obviously prone to more weight gain and obesity, colds, upper respiratory congestion, heart disease, diabetes. So those are all really already delineated. If you know your body type, you know what you're prone to, and it's pretty easy to offset that, which is a beautiful thing. So opposites create balance. It's all about offsetting your tendencies, knowing your individual body type.
And that makes a lot of sense to me because the one thing I'm a big believer in is that unless you're quiet, you're never going to really have a lot of self-awareness and understand
Mhm.
like what really resonates and what suits you. So for me, I really need to get out and go for a walk. I take my dog and I'm always like, that's my way to decompress, to ground, because I do feel I get very fired up and then I'll go to sleep and I'll hear things. I'll, think about things from that day that I should have done different, and if I don't take that time, so I do a few things. I'll do my nature walk with my dog. I'll do I have a really hard time with meditation, like really hard time just to take the day and turn off. So I'll make it happen by using Newcom or Brain Tap
Yep.
or something that's going to make my brain do it because it's hard for me to do it on its own. Does this make sense to you, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and for you, that's balancing. I certainly don't think that's balancing for everyone, and that,
Right.
as an example, a kapha, they need to do completely the opposite. They need to, be active, and they need to do things that are stimulating, and they almost shouldn't meditate. Like they just need to get out in the world and just be energized, and that's balancing because they're
Yes.
typically doing the opposite. They're sitting down and they're just, so yes, it's understanding yourself and knowing what brings balance. And when you get into it, you can actually start teasing apart the five different elements, which is a beautiful thing.
And again, I was going to say also relative to feng shui and the elements in feng shui, what you and I were talking about just now offline, right? The balance between fire and earth. And, in feng shui, they always say not to have too much fire in your home.
Right.
And I study the annual stars, the flying stars annually, and where to put fire, where not to put fire. I'm big on all of that because it's what you said, it creates the balance, which is where everyone feels good. Who doesn't feel good when they're balanced?
Yeah, I mean, so that's the essence of Ayurveda right there. And I alluded to it earlier, but you become more Vata as you age, regardless of your body types. And so one of the main tenets in Ayurveda is to offset that dryness. So I often use the analogy, and we have maybe spoke about this before, but I use the analogy of we all start as a grape, plump, full of water, full of vitality, and slowly over the course of time, as we age, we turn into a raisin.
Mm.
And so that is, I think, a really good analogy for the human body over time. And so Ayurveda is all about injecting the body with, they say, juice, but it's kind of the water element. It's something called ojas, another Sanskrit word. And ojas is really the key to life. It's what gives you vitality, that chi or that prana. It helps people live to 120. And so, in part, Ayurveda is a medicine of longevity, and it's about promoting ojas so that people are plump, full of water, and they can stand the test of time and live to 120 as well. And so, there's a lot of different therapies and food recommendations um, to to uh, to offset the aging process and to boost ojas inside the body as well.
Yeah, and even there's all these studies of the blue zones, and
Yep.
I hear people, they're like, I forget what was the name. It's the documentary that just came out not long ago. It was about the blue zones. Anyway, what I always say, and this is why I think Ayurveda is kind of cool. So people are like, you have to eat this one way. And if everyone eats like this, then you're going to live to 120. I'm like, that doesn't make sense to me. And I'm not an Ayurvedic medicine doctor, but it doesn't make sense to me because we're all bio individuals. So, maybe a lot of the people live that long because they're all similar body types, right? A lot of them are similar body types. They
Yep.
come from a similar area. They eat
Yep.
in a similar
Similar
manner.
genetics. Yep.
Right. So but it might not work for me living in Toronto here. You know what I'm saying? So,
So it's an awesome point. It is an awesome point because so everybody talks about, oh, you need to eat more salad, right? Like that's this universal thing that people are like, oh, in order to be healthy, you got to just eat more salad. Like that's good for you. But when you get to the energy of what a leafy green is, it is the essence of Vata. I mean, it is air and space. It lacks water, it lacks fire, it lacks earth. And so if you are a Vata, which I am, and I'm eating a cold salad, I'm adding those two elements, the space and air. So I'm adding Vata in my body and I'm creating an imbalance. So for me, eating leafy greens is absolutely a no-no. And so, again, there's no one dietary plan that everybody should be on. That's just, it doesn't exist. Ayurveda has some recommendations for a diet. It's called the Sattvic diet. And it's all about creating balance in the mind. It's also called the yogic diet. And it gets into the energy of the food that you're consuming, not the elements, but the actual quality of the foods. And there are certain foods that create the sattvic energy in the mind. And so Ayurveda, again, the tenet is you basically create your mind from the food that you eat. And so there are certain foods that promote sattva, which is like openness, clarity, peace, and Ayurveda, as well as yoga, would recommend you choosing those sattvic foods. They tend to be balancing for all body types, and they tend to promote mental wellness as well.
okay. So you said a couple things there. You were talking about, because you said you were a Vata,
Yep.
right? So eating salads may not be ideal for a Vata type
Right.
because you're not creating balance because you already are more the air, right? And that's what lettuce would represent. But somebody like me who is a Pitta would do well with salads because that would because I'm more fire, so it helps cool me down, create that balance. Does this make sense?
Absolutely. So for you, salad is balancing because pitta is fire and water. And then the salad that you're consuming is predominantly air and space. So it's not adding more fire, more pitta to your body. It's actually balancing that out.
Okay. So I shouldn't be having hot sauce at dinner.
No, you shouldn't. But the funny thing about pittas is they seek out these intense, hot aspects of life. And
That's
that's
so
just their
funny.
nature. And
Yeah.
so you need to undercut that across the board, including, yeah, the hot sauce.
I'm kind of touch and go with it anyway. I'm not one of those hot sauce fanatics. Okay, so then let's get into this whole energy of the food because I think that's a really
Yes.
because okay, so you have a lot of these university students, they go out, they eat McDonald's or deep fried or whatever. To me, this is like dead energy. The energy of the food is
Yep.
um does this make sense? I know you're going to describe it much
Yep.
better than me, but
Yeah. And I think everybody understands that, intuitively.
I
But
think
but
so.
again, Ayurveda has written textbooks on this, which is really cool. And so we talked about body types. We talked about the five elements that make up everything. But even more subtle than those five elements are they're called the three primal energies. And these are sattva, rajas, and tamas. I wish I had a visual. It's easier to kind of relay this information visually. But those are again kind of foreign Sanskrit words, but sattva is described as stillness. And then rajas is movement, and tamas is heaviness. And so those three energies make up everything. And so it's depending on what you consume from an energetic standpoint, that creates your mind. And so foods that are rajas, like coffee, alcohol, onions, garlic, these things that stimulate the mind, when you consume those on a daily basis, you are creating energy in the mind and you're creating movement in the mind. Foods that are tamas do the opposite of that. They're dulling to the mind. They dull the energy of the mind. McDonald's is the perfect example. Beef, mushrooms are tamas in energy. I
Oh,
know
we
everybody
talked about
loves,
that.
yeah,
Yes.
mushrooms. Everybody's like consumed with the idea of using medicinal mushrooms. From an Ayurvedic perspective, they're a big no-no because they dull the mind. And so I personally don't use them that frequently, but they can be beneficial in certain cases. So in Ayurveda, mushrooms are not prized. They're not traditionally used
So
because of
weird.
their effects on the mind.
Yeah, that's the exact opposite of what everybody's talking about. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody's talking about all the benefits of cordyceps and reishi and lion's mane. And
Yep.
I actually did a show on it. I think it was a year ago on medicinal mushrooms. So it's really interesting that Ayurveda doesn't really think it's the best thing for you.
Yeah. So it fits in that category of a tamas food. Leftovers are dulling to the mind. They're tamas. Marijuana, psychedelics, they're tamas. Eating after sunset creates tamas, creates that dull energy in the mind. And so you basically, your mind is based and formed on the foods that you eat. And so sattva is what we should all strive for. And so that is a whole nother area that again, textbooks have been written on this. It's what all yogis should be eating. They should be eating this list of sattvic foods that create balance specifically in the mind. And so foods that fall in that list are pretty simple. You have water, obviously fruits and vegetables, most of the whole grains, ghee, which is clarified butter, falls in that, raw nuts, raw seeds, honey, spices, and then there's a whole mix of botanicals. Ashwagandha is one of them, gotu-kola, bacopa, turmeric. These things are all sattvic in nature. And so Ayurveda definitely recommends balancing your body type, but it also recommends balancing your mind using sattvic foods specifically.
So interesting. So where does, because for me, listen, I've done every single diet under the sun. I have. So in the last 12 years, I've even at one point, I was eating a lot of raw food.
Mm.
I was once almost vegetarian, almost didn't quite make it because then I became almost anemic too. So I had a lot of health issues in my 40s. So I kind of tried everything. And where does animal protein fit in?
Yeah, so we can look at it from a body type perspective.
Okay.
There are certain animal proteins that affect the body types differently. Um, Vatas, they lack fire to digest animal proteins, and so they
Oh,
need to be very cautious about when they're consuming them, how much they're consuming them, and the type. Pittas, you have so much fire that you can consume anytime you want, as much as you want, because you can digest it. You have the fire. Kaphas are the same way, where they lack the fire element, and so they need to be careful as well. But when you get into the primal energies, the different qualities that we talked about, sattva, rajas, tamas, for the most part, animal proteins are not sattvic, which is why, by and large, the yogic diet and the Ayurvedic diet is vegetarian.
Right.
There are certain proteins that stimulate rajas, or that movement in the mind. And then there are certain proteins that are dulling to the mind, such as pork. So, that's kind of the basis there. It's all based upon energetics, more so than opinions and.
Yeah, yeah. Right. And so for me, I eat what supports me
Yeah.
and my body. And I also choose, not to get on the political side, I choose food that comes from um, a very healthy source. So, I don't support factory farming or all that kind of stuff. I know that's not what this conversation is about, but I'm curious, right?
Yeah.
Because some would say in order to follow Ayurvedic principles, you have to be vegetarian, but you don't.
You don't. And so one really good example of that is the Dalai Lama. He works with an Ayurvedic physician, potentially even a Tibetan physician, but he does consume meat one time per week as medicine.
Mm,
And so,
interesting.
again, he uses it with intention. He knows when to consume it, the different forms to consume. So it can be medicinal. And again, even if my body type doesn't have the fire capacity to break it down super easy, I need it for its stamina, its energy, its grounding, its nourishing properties. Without that, right, I'm just creating more vata, more of that space and air. And so it does have a grounding effect for me. And so I do consume it, infrequently, but I do consume it in the same way as the Dalai Lama.
It does sound like it's very balanced, though. It sounds balanced, and it's interesting because I had a conversation about I recorded a podcast earlier today about nutritional deficiencies and how, our food sources are not what they used to be. We don't grow our own food. We can't go and, eat meat from the farmer that's down the road. You get what I'm saying? Like, it's just,
Yeah.
this is not the way life is anymore. So I think with this, there is a balance. Because even if I look back at my parents who were farmers back in Croatia, they didn't eat meat every day. They
Yeah.
didn't eat, like, they weren't going to McDonald's twice a day. They weren't, right? Because anything that's out of balance, so it doesn't even, I know we're talking about Ayurveda, but I'm a big believer that everything in moderation, everything in balance.
Yeah, I mean, it gets back to the leafy greens conversation, right? And meat is the same way, where if it's healthy, it depends. It depends on the individual.
Yeah.
And so I certainly think it is important to consider that for most, if not all, individuals. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay, so what are, other than, because it sounds to me like Ayurvedic medicine is very much something one can follow, and
Yes.
it would be preventative, because the whole
Yes.
premise is that you are working to always balance your body and prevent disease, prevent illness as best as you can,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So what are options when somebody comes in and they're really sick? What are treatment options other than, using food as medicine and trying to create that balance? Do they use supplements? Do they use, I know you mentioned ashwagandha. Do they use botanicals,
Yep. Yep.
tinctures? I don't know.
Yep. So it all starts with the body type, but there's so much more beyond that. And again, it's a medicine of longevity, and so oil is critically important in so many different ways in Ayurvedic therapies, because oil really is the source of health and longevity, and it gives you that ojas, kind of plumps up the raisin, if you will. And
Mhm.
so um, there are certain lifestyle things that you can do on a daily basis to promote health, regardless of your body type. One of them is a self massage technique called Abhyanga. And Abhyanga is it's an oil massage that you do daily, or as often as you can, for 15 to 20 minutes before you get in the shower. Typically, the oils that you choose are based upon your body type. And so a Vata would use sesame oil, a Pitta would use coconut, And then Kapha would use safflower oil. And you start at the head and you massage all the way down your limbs, your joints, your muscles, and then you end up at the feet. And the feet really is I think where the gold is. That's where all of the nadis, the energy channels, both enter and exit the body. And so they recommend spending a lot of time on the feet as well. And so the idea is it's this, I think of it anyway, as this regimen of self-love. It's just a moment where you can kind of focus on yourself, nourish your entire body. And what ultimately what happens is that you're loosening all of these different doshas, the Vata, Pitta, Kapha, that are embedded in the target. And so you loosen them up so that your body then can get rid of them when they're in excess. And so Abhyanga is a critical element that Ayurveda recommends as a daily regimen tool. And again, I think the oil piece, another analogy would be, if you look at a piece of leather, and if you put that piece of leather out in the sunshine for a couple years without any kind of application or any care or anything, you just keep it out in the sun, it certainly will wither away, right? Mm-hmm. But if you oil that piece of leather every single day, it will maintain its integrity over the course of time. And so Ayurveda kind of looks at the body in the same way. If you can just oil the body up every single day, you're going to be able to create health and longevity over the long term. And so they also recommend you can even do like spoonfuls of olive oil, spoonfuls of ghee on a daily basis to consume that. And so they're not afraid of oil. Both inside and out. And so, another oil therapy is oil pulling in the mouth, which was interesting. It seems like there's more and more conversations around that right now.
Yeah.
Again, this is another practice. It takes 15 to 20 minutes. You can do it at the same time that you're doing the oil massage. But it's amazing what it can do for the mouth, for the teeth, the gums, for the, breaking up the biofilms of the bacteria, getting rid of the bad bacteria.
Nick, is that just with coconut oil only?
No, so the coconut oil is one of the primary oils for that. But I would say a better oil and probably a more universal oil is sesame seed oil.
For pulling?
For oil pulling, yep.
Oh, really?
Yep. And so they have slightly different energetic properties. Coconut oil is cooling. So if you are a Pitta, use coconut oil for your body, for your consumption, for your mouth, for the oil pulling. That is a perfectly suitable everyday oil for you. But I would say when you go to India, you work with patients, you're in the hospital, sesame is pretty universal.
Interesting. I never heard that. So sesame is also good for your teeth? Like, how
fantastic. Yeah. So it's interesting when you get back into the textbooks and you look at what was written about this. A lot of times physicians would recommend as a daily practice taking a spoonful of either white or black sesame seeds and putting them in your mouth and then just chewing them until they turn into an oil.
Wait, black sesame seeds. Okay, no, that's not the same thing. Sorry. I just had a thought. It's not the same thing. Not the same as black cumin seed oil.
No, oil. No, different substance.
Different. Yeah. So that's so interesting. Okay. Yeah. So that all goes to the whole thing about, drying up like a raisin as we get older, right?
Yes. 100%. And again, you're not swallowing the oil when you're doing it, you are spitting it out. And the thought process, which again this isn't proven by science yet. I think it will be, but there is that gap between traditional Ayurveda and modern science. But I think we're starting to prove a lot of these old tenets as being truthful. And the idea, according to the old Ayurvedic texts, is that you do get rid of toxins from the upper region of the body. Some say the whole body, but I would say that you definitely will reduce the excess doshas that are in the head, the neck, and the mind, doing this on a daily basis. So you do spit that oil out. You don't consume it because you are getting rid of bacteria and potentially these energetic forces that are lodged in your tissues.
Right, right. So, in terms of supplements, because we're kind
Yes.
of, are there recommended, if I came to see you as my Ayurvedic doctor, and I don't know what I'd come to see you with, but just say I'm coming to see you, and you do have, like your doctor's bag of things that you would
Yep.
recommend other
Yep.
than practices.
Yep. Yes, so there's plenty to be done. And the panacea, the kind of cure-all from an Ayurvedic perspective, is a blend of botanicals called triphala. Tri is a Sanskrit word that means three. Phala means fruit, and so it's a blend of three fruits. And the three fruits are perfectly balanced. So there's one that decreases Vata, one that decreases Pitta, and then one that decreases Kapha. And this formula is a digestive system tonic. So it's very slightly laxative, but it tonifies the GI tract. And so, according to Ayurveda and according to most forms of traditional medicine, the GI tract is the center of all health, and it's the most important aspect. And so Ayurveda is the same way. So you're getting rid of these excess doshas through the GI tract when you're taking this on a daily basis. And so if you walk into any Ayurvedic physician's office, you probably will walk out with a script or a prescription for triphala. And the dose there varies from person to person. Traditionally, they use a powder, and they put a little bit in water and they stir it up and they let it sit for 8 hours, and then you drink it before you go to bed. There's a little bit of sludge in the bottom you don't consume. You just toss that out, and then you make another batch for the morning. I prefer capsules. I generally will use about 500 milligrams every single night. Some people need upwards of a gram or even a gram and a half on a daily basis. And so triphala it's a miracle. I love it. I would highly recommend anybody seek that out as an everyday tonic.
So you
Um,
take that every day, Nick?
I
Even
take it
though you
every
don't.
day. Yeah.
Okay, it sounds like it's almost like I hate to say the word detox because I
Mhm.
feel like it has such a negative connotation to the word, but it's almost like a little mini detox that you're doing if you're doing it every day, or no?
It does so many different things, but I would say that is one of the primary attributes of triphala. Yeah,
And
it's
then you said
detoxing.
it depends, I guess, on what you there are they three different formulas, or is it one formula called
It's
trifle?
one formula, so it's usually a third of amla, a third of haritaki, and a third of bibitaki, and so they're just in that perfect, 33% ratio when you take it.
Very cool. I'm gonna have to look that up.
And then again, it gets into your body type's energetics. I'm a huge advocate of adaptogens.
Mm.
Ashwagandha obviously has taken the world by storm. It's now everywhere. People are starting to use it. You just need to understand the energetic properties of certain adaptogens to know
Yeah.
which one is right for you. I would highly recommend finding one that's suitable for your body type. Stick with it every day and get the benefit of an adaptogen that way. So ashwagandha, as an example, is the perfect antidote to Vata. So for my body type, it's ideal for creating balance. It's heating, it's calming, it's oily, it brings water into my body. And so using it on a daily basis, I'm getting all of the benefits that are adaptogenic, but I'm also balancing my body type by lowering Vata. And so all of the different adaptogens, rhodiola, schizandra, shatavari, they all have different energetic properties. And so understanding that becomes essential, because if you're using rhodiola as an example, rhodiola is cooling, it's stimulating, and it's really drying. It dries a person out. If you already have those same attributes yourself and you're consuming that botanical day in and day out, it's going to create imbalance. So adaptogens are generally non-toxic, but energetically, they can be completely toxic. They can throw you out of whack. So
Oh, interesting. So, because a lot of menopausal women, it's recommended that they take ashwagandha and rhodiola.
yeah,
But I think it's because isn't it typically ashwagandha is more for the stressed and wired, and rhodiola is more for the stressed and tired.
you're
And a
right.
lot of a lot of menopausal women are both.
And energetically, those two botanicals will balance each other out
Mm,
because they're completely on polar opposite ends of the
yeah.
energetic spectrum. And so there's harmony in that. So doing that on a daily basis, if you can do something that's neutral energetically, fantastic. You're still getting all of the benefits of the adaptogens, but you're not pushing yourself either into balance or out of balance.
Right. And, I just know because I speak to a lot of women who are both. They feel both. They
Mm-hmm.
do have times where they're really, feeling stressed out and wired, and they need to kind of bring that down. And then there's the ones that can't get off the couch, and they're that stressed and tired because they just want to kind of put the world away. Right. So
Yep.
that happens too. Oh my gosh. Okay, what else? We should probably wrap this up, but I mean, there's so much more we could cover off. I just want to make sure that you didn't forget anything.
Yeah, I think the last thing that always excites me to talk about, and I think that kind of puts a nice bow on all of this, is a therapy called Panchakarma. And again, it's one of those core principles, therapies of Ayurvedic medicine. Pancha karma, two different words from Sanskrit. Pancha means five, and karma means action. And so these are five different therapies that get rid of all of the imbalances, the excess Vata, the excess Pitta, the excess Kapha that we build up in our body. And so Panchakarma is something that Ayurveda recommends doing seasonally or at least one time per year, just to kind of push reset and get rid of these toxins. And so just in short, without doing, a total deep dive into this area, which we could, the five procedures are purgation, which is a laxative therapy, emesis, which is vomiting, a nasal cleansing herbal therapy where you inhale herbs, and then you have an enema, which of course expels the contents of the colon. And then there's something called bloodletting, which can be practiced in different ways. The traditional way is using leeches on certain parts of the body to get rid of that bad blood, so that you create health. And
Have you
so
done this, Nick?
I've done panchakarma, yeah, and I've worked in a hospital that performed panchakarma, where people would come in with, cancer and really like severe conditions, and over the course of 40, 50, 60 days, the people were healthy, walking again, and cleaner than they were before they came in.
Okay, I'm fascinated by this. So there's hospitals where you would go in and have this done. Like
Yep.
what? You walk in, they're like, okay, now we're going to get you to vomit. Okay, now we're going to give you an enema.
Well, so yeah, so it's so you walk in and they basically, just like any hospital, they get to know you, right? They
Yeah.
take your pulse, they look at your tongue, they understand your condition. They feed you a very simple diet. Usually it's khichdi, which khichdi is kind of a sattvic, very killing meal in Ayurveda. It's one of my favorite meals. Google khichdi.
I'm going to
Um,
have to.
and so you basically, you just simplify and remove any problems that people can have, and you get them back to basics. The first step then, beyond dietary modification, is oleation. And we've talked about oil, right?
Yeah.
So they recommend doing oil therapies, oiling your skin, consuming oils, doing this on a daily basis just to loosen up those toxins. And so that can take, weeks, days to weeks. And then the next step is sweating. You do either saunas, or you do certain kinds of massages which then mobilizes the toxins and kind of gets them into the GI tract, as it were. And then after that, you start moving into those 5 therapies, and you do them in a specific order so that the energies, the toxins that you've mobilized and moved into the GI tract, you then eliminate from the body. So there's a lot more to it. I probably didn't do any justice describing it, but it's incredibly purifying and can be incredibly transformative for individuals that have tried everything else for their health condition just to push reset. And then from that usually is the jumping off point for much deeper therapies. So there's a whole branch of Ayurveda called Rasayana, which means the path of juice. So it's all about rejuvenation. So this is usually when they introduce some really interesting botanicals and substances such as shilajit, where you start doing ashwagandha. You start doing things to really rejuvenate the body, because at that point you've cleared the toxins, you've improved your agni, your digestive fire. You're able to consume these and use these plants to form health in the body moving forward. So
That's so cool. I mean, you mentioned the oiling. You said
oleation, yeah.
Oleation. That to me is kind of like, and you're saying loosening. So one of the things that I always did in my practice was drainage first. I don't know if you've ever heard of Unda
Yep.
at
The
Belgium.
numbers. Yeah.
Yeah, Unda. It's very old school, but a lot of times people would feel better
Yep.
just from that. It's like what you were saying, like the body, it's almost like we become like stagnant, like everything just kind of gets stuck.
Yep.
Right. So a lot of times people would, if they weren't really, really ill and really toxic, they would feel better. So like I would actually put my whole family on an UNDA protocol quarterly, just to kind of keep things flowing. It was, I think now, I mean, it's harder with 2 of my kids not at home to make them take their UNDA 3 times a day. It's not going to happen. But even the whole leeches thing, I find this fascinating, because not to say that I would ever do it, because I think I would just freak out. But have you ever heard this? Tell me this. How women, right up until menopause, their risk of heart disease is much lower than a man's.
Mm-hmm.
Then once they stop menstruating, their risk is equal to or higher than a man's. And so I interviewed, he's a pharmacologist out of the UK, where he was saying everybody, like really midlife and onward, should donate blood.
Yep.
That whole turning over of the blood.
Yeah, and it gets back to the core essence of what is Ayurveda. I mean, women are, blood is the fire element. It is Pitta, it's fire and water combined. That's blood. And women are getting rid of that element, every month. And once you stop doing that, it changes. Then you build up that element, and your body is not used to that. And you get that fire element, which is expressed as a hot flash. And so it is important, either being post-menopause to do it, just to push reset. And it's important for Pitta individuals as well, because that's the essence of the fire element. So it wouldn't be recommended for somebody who's a Vata body type nor a Kapha body type, but definitely recommended for Pittas.
Very interesting. Just so fascinating. There's so much more we could talk about, but let us know where we can find you. And maybe, give us your favorite, like where to start if you're interested in Ayurvedic medicine.
Yes. So I'm not on social media, but I work for Neurohacker Collective. We create dietary supplements, mostly for the US market, kind of amazing nootropic cognitive products or anti-aging products. And you can find us and me at neurohacker.com. In terms of where to start, I mean, this is such a good question. I often will use the analogy of digging a hole. And I find that most people often will dig a little hole here, and then they'll, move over to the side and dig another little hole, but they don't ever become an expert in one thing and keep digging one hole. And so, in order to hit the water, you've got to just dig one hole and keep digging. And so just like anything with like Ayurveda, just start somewhere and enter that pool of knowledge and just keep going. And once you do, it becomes this amazing, vast philosophy and way of living that can really transform your life. And I think the best entry point for anybody is just picking up a book. I know that was for me, that was it. I started with a book called Prakriti. Prakriti means body type, and it's written by Robert Svoboda. I've recommended that book to numerous people, and it's interesting the feedback that I get. People like inevitably come back and just say, yes, what a fun read. Like, I'm excited about Ayurveda. I understand my body type. I want to learn more. It's very accessible. It covers, the great principles, I think, of Ayurveda. And so that's a really good entry point. There are some deeper books too. David Frawley is a doctor that's written some amazing books, very technical. Vasant Lad is another doctor from New Mexico who's written a number of books. One of my favorite books, and I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but this is called The Yoga of Herbs. And this was written by Vasant Lad and David Frawley, I think in the 1980s. But the amazing thing about this book is that it breaks all the different botanicals down into their energetic properties, and it describes them from the energetic standpoint. So it tells you what's good for a Vata body type or a Pitta or a Kapha, and specifically. And so there aren't many books that really get into the energetic qualities of herbs. But the Yoga of Herbs is hands down my favorite that does that.
Oh, I'm going to have to get that one because I'm totally interested in all of that. That's awesome. Thank you so much. This has been such a great conversation, Nick. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. This was fun. I hope there's some value for your listeners and for yourself. It's such a vast field of study that it's always hard to know where to start because it is so vast and so ancient, but it's so amazing and it really can be accessible. So start.
I'm going to give everyone your email address. No, I'm just kidding. Can you imagine?
Please
everyone,
don't.
Email Nick and ask all your questions. I'm just teasing you. Thanks again, Nick.
All right. I appreciate you. Thanks.
Okay, I hit stop on that. Can you imagine? That would be kind of funny. It wouldn't.